Technically speaking, if you make $1 off of your drone footage, the government could say that you are flying your drone illegally. I always like to protect myself as much as possible from the government being able to accuse me of things, so I decided it was time to get my commercial drone pilot's license. I decided to do this last winter, and so you'll see in the upcoming video, I had a beard, look a little different than I look now, but I wanted to document the process of taking the test and then giving you my thoughts about the test, and then giving you the questions that I found to be the most valuable for taking the test. You'll hear in the video, there are somewhere between 10 and 15 questions or so that seem to come out of nowhere. I can tell you I spent a lot of time studying. Well, I say a lot, 10 to 15 hours. And for me, that's a lot of time when it comes to studying. I usually retain stuff fairly easily, especially when it's stuff I'm interested in. And I was kind of surprised that I saw that many questions that I hadn't went over. I used all kinds of resources and websites and YouTube channels and all kinds of stuff to try to make sure I was prepared for this test. And ultimately, I passed the test and I was prepared, but I was still shocked at how many questions I felt like I hadn't even read. Now, it's my belief that these questions cycle a lot, and the government, I believe, just my belief, does this on purpose to keep test takers on their toes. So I wanted to put my own guide together based on that concept that I think are the questions that are most valuable to passing this Part 107 drone pilot's test. This video and the associated blog post that I'm going to share with you are designed to make sure you pass this test. If you know the answers to these questions, there's an incredibly high likelihood that you're going to pass this test. I just pulled up to the testing center. I've been studying for 10 days, watching a lot of videos, reading a lot of content, and just doing what I do for any other test that I really wanted to pass. And so let's see what happens. I'm going to go into the testing center and see if I can get 42 out of these 60 questions correct. The test involves 60 multiple choice questions, and they allow you 2 hours to take the test. It's $160, and so you don't want to waste that money. You want to make sure that you prepare and that you can pass on the first shot, because you're giving the government $160. Don't give them any more than you absolutely have to. Pass this test on the first shot. You need a 70%. If you know these questions, you're going to get it done. Now, I've also listed some other resources, some links that you can click on, and one in particular, this one right here. This is King Schools. They have a practice test that you can kind of customize. This was my most valuable resource to passing this test. So make sure you check that out. The link is right here under study materials. I also list some other resources on here that you want to check out. I think they have a list of questions that aren't common, and they just kind of cycle those in and out to prevent people from being able to remember them and put them on blog posts and videos like this. However, I did take notes as soon as I got out of the exam to try and make sure that I got these questions down, or at least most of them, to make sure I give you guys the best study guide possible. Now, this is very important. The key areas to master on this test, you need to know your airspace classifications. There's no other way than just memorize it. Know which airspace is which, and this kind of breaks it down a little bit for you. Weather is a huge one. They want to know things like, how does the weather affect your performance in your flight? You need to know a lot about the weather, as well as things like, how the aircraft, how the drone responds when you get up to upper elevations that you're never going to go to. But that is part of the aeronautical test, the general knowledge test. So you're going to need to know how weather conditions of all kinds affect the performance of your aircraft. And so here you go. I put these practice questions together, and they're almost exactly identical to what you'll see on the test, maybe reworded a little bit. And it starts with basic ones like the minimum age. And you'll see right here, I have the answers. And so you can see here, flying in Class C airspace, what must a drone pilot do? They want to know that you know what each airspace means and how it relates to whatever activity you're doing. Here's an example of the kind of things that they use to try to trick you up. In almost all cases, you're dealing with ground level. At ground level is what they want to base a lot of these regulations off of. It means sea level really doesn't have anything to do with, flying your drone. It's a matter of where you're taking off, what level you're taking off, and how high you're allowed to fly above that. And so it doesn't matter what mean sea level is typically. What matters is the elevation, where you're taking off, and then how high you're allowed to go relative to that point. This one's definitely on the test. Every 24 months, you got to recertify. Know your weather. Know what a METAR report is, what it gives you. It's a routine weather observation, and there's going to be basic questions just like this. This one's definitely going to be on there. 87 knots, not 87 miles per hour, and that's how they're going to try to trip you up. It's knots. They want to know that you know how to handle weather conditions and the effect those weather conditions have on your aircraft. This one's definitely going to be on there. What's the purpose of CTAF? And it's to communicate with other pilots at non-towered airports. And that's the key. Non-towered or non-operational towered airports. Maximum weight limit for a drone to qualify under Part 107 rules. 55 pounds, not 56, 55. Here's another question. You're going to see something very similar. They want to know that the pilot in command knows how to handle all situations. And that means when you lose your link to your aircraft, which will happen. The more you fly, the more the chances of something like this happen, and you need to know how to handle it. They want to know that you know how to handle it. A little tip here is in most cases of questions like this, it's not to contact them or contact someone else. It's to follow the manufacturer's recommendations and procedures. Now, here's a question that's definitely going to stump a lot of people up, and it makes you think. What should you do if you experience a near midair collision with a manned aircraft? And just to give you an example, I was flying near the coast in Delaware, and I was legal. I was doing everything right. I wasn't flying to even record for a video, so I wasn't making any money. I was just recreationally flying. There were no, do not fly zones or anything like that. This was before Biden comes to Rehoboth all the time. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a jet just comes racing down the coast. And by the time I even knew what was going on, he was gone. And so I wouldn't call that a near midair collision, but it was close enough that I was like, that could have been bad. The FAA doesn't want to know about this stuff. They have a lot going on. They don't want to know about all that kind of thing. If it was close enough to call a near midair collision, then they want you to report it within 10 days. Does that tell you how much they want to know about it? They don't care. They just want to document it. Now, here's an example of how they take multiple questions that basically reference the same material and just word it a little differently. So here you see number 10. What action should the remote PIC take if they lose control of an unmanned aircraft? Follow lost link procedures. Reworded. What must a remote pilot do? And technically, a remote pilot is not the same as a pilot in command. Remote pilot is on the controls. Pilot in command is the one supervising, making sure all the rules and laws are followed. And so you'll get that. It's the same answer, basically, but it's worded differently. Under Part 107, what are visibility requirements? I guarantee you this will be on there. 3 miles. NOTAMs. You need to know what NOTAMs are. They provide important information, like that jet that was flying down the coast. If the president or somebody was in the area, NOTAMs is going to be what tells me I need to be aware of. Know it. Know how to get to it. Know how to use it. And know how to answer this question. And here we go, referencing the remote pilot in command. You need to know the roles of these people. And remote pilot in command is an important one. PIC, like we saw above, is even more important, but both will be on the test. This question will definitely be on the test. You need to know this because you don't want to get it confused. And you can see how they kind of put some answers in here to try to confuse you. Make sure you know 500 feet below and 2,000 feet horizontally. And this does include fog. This is anything that could be considered a ceiling. And speaking of ceilings, this one will be on there. You need to know what a ceiling is. It's the lowest layer of clouds obscuring any kind of view, and it can be broken or overcast, completely, solid. And a lot of people get this wrong. You need to know the rule. The rule is you can fly without having collision lighting 30 minutes before sunrise or 30 minutes after sunrise and sunset. Scanning, definitely questions on there. Multiple questions about scanning. And you need to know what they mean by scanning and how they want you to do it. And in this question, it references, when flying near an airport. What does the term scanning refer to when flying near an airport? Well, it's the same thing. Scanning means whenever you're doing it anywhere. But you see these little phrases they use, and you need to be careful of those. It just means that you're constantly surveying the surrounding airspace for hazards. And you need to be doing that whenever you're flying a drone because of, like I said earlier, that jet may be coming out of nowhere. And if you're near an airport, you're going to have a lot more chances of seeing stuff like that than you would if you're just in the middle of nowhere. Big question right here, and it doesn't seem right. It seems like it should be more than that, but this is the law. What is the minimum horizontal distance that you should maintain from manned aircraft at all times? 500 feet is the answer. This one's tricky too. You need to know your airspaces and what they mean. Under what conditions may remote pilots fly through restricted area? So restricted makes it sound like you wouldn't be able to fly there at all, right? No. Restricted means they want to control who's in the airspace. And so it's restricted to whoever they allow in the airspace. And that means you need towers or agencies' authorization to fly there. This one is one of those questions that you may see, you may not see, you may see a version of it. And it's questions like this that can stump you up. What must you do to determine the likelihood of fog formation? Well, you need to understand what fog formation is, and that's the point of this, to make sure that you're aware of what the weather is and how it forms. And for a pilot, you check that by comparing the temperature and the dew point. If they're far away, if they're spread, you don't have much of a chance or any chance for fog. The closer they are, the more chance you have for fog. And that means you need to be able to maintain those distances we were talking about earlier. So if fog can form, sporadically because you have a very low spread between the temperature and the dew point, then you need to be extra vigilant about making sure you maintain those distances. What's the minimum distance to clouds in operating a drone under Part 107 rules? What's the minimum distance from clouds required for Part 107 operations? You very well may see duplicate questions like this. And so that can throw you off. And you're like, what, are they looking for a different answer? Why would they, give me the same question in such a similar format? Look at the answers. Okay, now look at the answers of this one. See how they change that up? That's the kind of thing they use to try to trip you up. Now, you can use this to your advantage because you can, if you're aware of it, you can compare the two questions and compare the sets of answers. And by process of elimination, if you don't know the answer, you can start to kind of figure out what the answer is. There's a question like this on there, and it made me think, like, what are they trying to get? And they weren't trying to get anything. It was something very simple. And I think I got this one wrong. I think I put heavy rain because I didn't know, nowhere did I read or hear what a thunderstorm was as far as technically, from them. What did the FAA consider a thunderstorm? And what the FAA considers a thunderstorm is lightning. That's the key. That's the thing that's the most dangerous and makes the most sense. And a lot of times these questions are like that. It's like, okay, well, I didn't study that. Well, what makes sense? Now, in the moment when I was taking the test, rain made sense to me, and I'm pretty sure that's what I put, but lightning makes more sense from an FAA standpoint, and that's what they're looking for. They're looking for their viewpoint, not necessarily yours. Lightning is the most dangerous, rain is not. Turbulence could be another one that could throw you off, but in this case, the answer is lightning, and it's one of those things you just have to remember. High density. This one's on the test, guys, and this one had me stumped. Let's just say it wasn't on enough study guides and materials and videos that I remembered it. I'm sure it was covered somewhere, but effect does high density altitude have on your aircraft? And so that just means you need to be careful not to mix your terms up here. And so high density altitude refers to being higher in elevation, and it means that your propellers are going to have an efficiency that's decreased. In other words, the density of the air is lower, and therefore the response of the propellers is lower. Very tricky question, will be on the test. Loading equipment, I think there is a question about that on there, and this is a fairly common sense answer. You need to make sure that the weight that you add to your aircraft is balanced according to the manufacturer's instructions. Same thing to do with commercial airlines. They need to make sure that their weight is balanced, their cargo is balanced according to the manufacturer's instructions. Temperature inversion, more, weather stuff. And there's questions like this. You need to know your weather and how it affects your aircraft. Another weather question. This one is one of those that, I didn't see it anywhere in the study material, but bam, there it comes. And so their technical definition of what a microburst is they seldom last longer than 15 minutes. That's the key. We were talking about scanning earlier, right? And well, what is scanning? Scanning is systematically focusing on different segments of the sky for short intervals, and that's your keyword. Short intervals. You're looking off to the left for a few seconds, and then you're coming around to the right, scanning the sky in short intervals to make sure there's no hazards. Here's one that a lot of people get wrong because they think there's no way you can fly over a person. Well, you can fly over a person when they are directly participating in operation. And the way they get you is by trying to throw you off with these other answers. So be careful that you can fly over people when they're directly participating in the operation. More weather. What environment is structural icing most likely to occur? And it's going to be some, answer similar to this when the clouds, when the cumulus clouds are at freezing temperatures, you can get structural icing. And a question like this can really throw you off because you're not supposed to be in the clouds, yet they're asking you when structural icing may happen. And that's because you may get caught in clouds, like with a heavy fog that just kind of rushes in while your aircraft is in the air. You need to be aware of the hazards and how to handle them. This one's most likely on the test. It wants to know that you understand what the characteristics of moist, unstable air is. Well, it tells you it's unstable. You're going to have turbulence and showers. It's moist, right? Don't overthink these things. Okay, so here's the one where they want to know that when can you exceed 400 feet AGL while flying under Part 107. Always notice how they use AGL. Very rarely, if ever, do they use MSL. So if you see MSL in an answer, I'd be very skeptical of picking it. When you're flying within 400 feet of a structure where you're allowed to then go up to about 400 feet above the height of that structure. Any controlled airspace, you need ATC permission. You need to know the differences between what is controlled airspace and what is uncontrolled airspace. Know your airspaces. Your airspaces will answer a lot of questions for you. Another one of those questions that probably, it's cycled on and off, and you may or may not see it, but it's one of those that is not in a lot of the study materials. What effect does uphill terrain slope have on launch performance? Well, it increases the launch distance because it's going to take longer to take off. Has nothing to do with a drone, right? Well, that's what they want. They want to know that you know the rules. This is a general airman's knowledge test, so you need to know even stuff like this, although you're not going to see it in a lot of study materials. So this one is kind of a common sense thing. Don't overthink it. What effect does an uphill terrain slope have on launch performance? So just think, if you're in a plane and the plane's having to go uphill to take off, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to cause you to have or need more distance to take off. What's associated with the unstable air mass? Worded differently? Well, see, the thing is if you get one of these wrong, well, now you could potentially get two questions wrong that really is only on the subject matter of one. They do a lot of this, and very similar questions, and with very similar answers, and it can really trip you up if you get into your head on this. Most of the time, just apply some practical knowledge and you're going to be fine, or reference back to the previous question that was similar, and that'll help a lot. What effect does humidity have on aircraft performance? This is on the test, and you need to understand humidity to get this right. As humidity increases, air density decreases, reducing performance. You need to understand humidity to make sure you get questions like this right. Imagine if you get this one wrong and there's a similar question just like this and you don't get it. That's two questions wrong. You're starting to hurt your chances of passing the test drastically. This is another question that's referenced the same way it was earlier. What's your weather visibility requirement? That's the basic question. 3 miles. But they try to trip you up by throwing in stuff. Take it back to the fundamental of the question, and you'll have a much better chance of getting the right answer. All right, big one. Know your airspaces. Military operations area. What's the purpose? It separates military training activities from IFR traffic. Know your MOA and all your airspaces and what you are allowed to do and not allowed to do in each airspace. A lot of people get this one wrong. Which of the following is a true statement about flying drones over a moving vehicle? You're technically not allowed to fly your drone over a vehicle unless it's in a sparsely populated area. This is one of those that there's really no way to enforce it. Who's to say when your drone's 400 feet in the air if you're directly over a vehicle or not? But what you need to know is how it's written in the guide here, and how it's written is you're only allowed to fly over vehicles if the vehicle's in a sparsely populated area. What that means, I don't know, and to be honest with you, it doesn't matter. This is the answer. This is what you need to know to this question, and it will be on the test. From a safety point of view, I think the intent here is to make sure you're not flying over, say, one of those 12-lane highways that's, got a lot of people, like outside of LA or something. They don't want you flying over roads like that. Here's another question that just kind of rephrases some material from above. Here's a question: if your drone weighs, another rephrase, but this one I think has a little bit of a different answer. So if your drone weighs 55 pounds, so they're giving you the weight, what action must you take to be legal under Part 107? Well, you know that number. If your drone weighs 55 pounds, you need to have it registered. Know your minimum and your maximum when it comes to that. Basic questions: what happens when cold air meets warm air? They want to know that you understand weather. And because it can have an impact on your aircraft, will this specific type of event ever have an effect on a drone pilot? Not a typical drone pilot, not small drones. Maybe a military drone pilot, or, maybe when Amazon has their drones up and running, that kind of thing. Yeah. And some of this stuff is designed for that kind of advancement. And so they want to know that anyone that is responsible for some type of aircraft understands the weather and the effects that it'll have on their aircraft. Definitely a couple questions like this, and you need to make sure they want to know that you know for sure who needs the license and who doesn't. And if you're just flying as a hobbyist, the hobbyist technically, I believe, is defined by making money. So if you're not making money, you're a hobbyist. If you're making any kind of money that's related to your drone flying at all, like with myself, if I'm putting it on YouTube, there's definitely an ability for them to say you're making money somehow, indirectly, directly. You're making money, and you're using your drone footage to help do so. You're no longer a hobbyist. And that was the reason I decided to get my license. I wanted to be in compliance. But you need to know what the rules are, because you're going to see questions just like this. The last example is the best source for determining your aircraft performance data and operating limitations. Well, where do you think you would get that information? It's always going to be the manufacturer or the user manual. And that's it. I would say if you're good with tests, you need to plan for at least 10 hours of studying. If you're not good with tests, I've heard of some people studying for up to 40, 50 hours. And so this test is definitely it's intense. And if you want to pass it, you need to know the material. You need a 70% to pass it, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but you need 42 out of 60 questions. And that can be very hard to do if you start getting some of these questions wrong, where they're worded differently, but all based on the same topic. Same subject matter. Okay, so that is a wrap. Took me about an hour and 25 minutes, and I passed with an 87%. And my initial thoughts, I had 39 questions I marked as I definitely knew the answer. And so then the remaining questions out of the 60, I was different degrees of uncertain. I'd say probably 5 of them I was pretty confident, and then the rest of them I was kind of shaky. The most effective learning resource I had was the King's, I think it's King's, the practice test that they have. And just by going through that, and answering the questions they had on there and comparing it, you know, when you're done, it grades them for you, and kind of gives the explanations. I probably gained the most value out of the time I spent with that. And so I got an 87. So I definitely got quite a few of those questions I had marked as questionable right. And, you know, I felt pretty confident about it, and it paid off. I got through it. You know, I got the license. I was curious as to how high of a grade I could get. But there's quite a few questions. I'm going to say about 12 questions that really weren't covered by any of the videos or information that I'd really kind of gone over. And I read through, you know, everything that I had, everything the FAA supplied. So I'm sure I went over it somehow, some way, but it just wasn't one of the, you know, there's 12, maybe 15 questions that just weren't a part of the common questions that you saw on all the different resources. And that's probably the most surprising part. And so I'm going to try to find some of those questions and highlight those for you here. If you know anyone that's going to take the Part 107 test, share this content with them. It's going to help them pass. I made this content because this is the kind of content that I valued when I was studying for my test. I got an 87% on my test. And to be honest with you, I thought I was going to get much higher than that. I thought I was probably going to come close to acing it. I didn't. And that's because of those questions that they cycle in and out of the different tests and the testing centers. They're there to trip you up. They want to make sure you know the material as it's written, and this study guide and blog post will make sure that you do. Let us know down in the comments below what grade you got on your Part 107 pilot's test. I got an 87, and like I said, I studied somewhere around 12, 14 hours or so. How long did you study? What grade did you get? And with that, I'll see you guys on the next video.